And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome to Open Connection, your host, Robert Pictou. Our show today comes to you from the traditional and unceded territory of the Tsimshian people. One of the oldest mentions of women's health dates back to ancient Egypt. The Calhoun Gynecological Papyrus is one of the largest manuscripts from 1850 to 1700 BC. The manuscript has 34 paragraphs that detail medical problems related to women's health. The Calhoun Papyrus contains accounts of the symptoms, how the physician should deal with the patients presenting these symptoms, and the recommended treatments. We begin today's Open Connection with Dr. Patricia Mills' presentation at this year's Nation and Nations Women's Gathering.
Exhaustion, absolutely. Burnout, all the way through, that's exactly right. Libido can be low, absolutely. Reproductive health, so fertility, infertility, menopause that happens too early, too severe, lasts for too long in terms of symptoms, and then menopausal issues afterwards like osteoporosis, diabetes, heart attacks, stroke, right? Cancer. All of those things are related to your hormones. And why is that? Hormones are chemical messengers in your body. They are signaling molecules. They signal your body to do certain things. And if your signals are off, how can your function, any function in the body, be working well? And when your hormones start to be affected, because there's so many different kinds of hormones and they all interact with each other, so estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, all of your sex hormones, right? Estrogen is like your vavavoom hormone. It helps you be fertile. It feeds the brain information. It teaches the brain. It tells the brain how to work in terms of controlling temperature. That's why you get hot flashes in the menopause transition. It actually goes to your brain and helps your brain be healthy in terms of memory and thinking and planning. And with the mood, the hormones in the brain are produced to create good mood. Testosterone is muscle mass and libido. Progesterone is your chill hormone. It helps you also get and stay pregnant. Cortisol is your stress hormone. And you need enough cortisol to deal with the healthy stressors of life, but you don't want so much that you end up in burnout, right? And then we have insulin, which is our sugar hormone. And it responds to the food that we eat. And when we dysregulate insulin, when we do things to imbalance insulin, it actually then imbalances all of these other hormones. So I'm going to teach you how to eat for hormone health. But before I do this, I really want you to understand, we're waiting for the slides to come up. Because I don't want to launch into this conversation and then have you experience any sort of issues in terms of your mental state with what you've been eating over the last couple of days, because people were joking about that a bit. So what I want to do is I want to give a period of gratitude, because you're going to learn that some of the foods that you're eating on a regular basis don't serve your hormones. And probably some of the food that you've eaten over the last 48 hours also don't serve your hormones. And you know what? That's okay. We are going to be grateful for the love and the caring and the thought that went behind the making of this food, the provision of this food, and in the same, we're going to hold the space for all of that, plus the space of learning. Just like I'm learning how to play the fiddle, it's never too late to learn how to eat for your hormones. And so I want you to have a beginner's mind with this and to be open and to be grateful for all of the abundance that we do have in our life in terms of food and the shifts that we can make in our decisions of how to eat for hormone health. Okay? So when we're talking about eating for hormone health, there's actually 4 factors that I'm going to cover, okay? And we're going to be talking about eating for hormones, so hormones versus calories, so kind of debunking some of the myths around eating for calories if your goal is for weight. So for example, hormones control weight around the midsection versus weight around the thighs versus weight around the arms. All of those things are controlled by hormones. Calories have something to do with it, but hormones have much more to do with it. We're going to talk about food combining, how to combine foods for hormone health. We're going to talk about what you should be avoiding to reduce inflammation in the body, which is a low burning fire that can cause damage in the tissues, and cortisol hormone has something to do with that. We'll talk about that. And I'm going to teach you what foods you need to make sure you are including in your daily eating so that your body can actually make hormones. Because guess what? A lot of women make the mistake of under-eating, undernourishing themselves in the quest for a better ideal weight or better energy or better sleep, and they actually end up messing up their hormones by not including enough of the right foods in their diet.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Thank you for staying with us. Hormones and calories both play a role in weight management, but they affect the body in different ways. Hormones are chemical messengers that regulate many bodily functions, while caloric deficits and surpluses can affect hormonal imbalance. Let us return the conversation with Dr. Mills.
So, first of all, the hormone versus calories. That conversation needs to include the conversation about the insulin hormone that responds to how much sugar you have in your food. Now, people really get confused about this because they're like, well, okay, there's the table sugar, like the white sugar that I could add to my tea or coffee, or maybe that's in the Coca-Cola or in the pastries. Like, I know about that sugar, but I'm actually going to teach you that there are 3 kinds of sugars, 3 kinds of carbohydrates. Is everyone here familiar with the carbohydrates, right? Okay. So each different kind of carbohydrate has a different effect on your hormones. Do people know that here? No. Okay, this is a bit of a mind blow. So the 3 kinds of carbohydrates are, number 1, sugar. That's the one that you would commonly know as table sugar, maple sugar, coconut sugar, right? The refined sugar that you find that you can add to your foods or added to ultra-processed foods. And that sugar is considered a simple sugar. It is made up, for example, the sucrose is made up of glucose and fructose, 2 of the most simple sugars. If you're taking notes, you don't need to, because I have a YouTube video on this information. Sorry, I should have said that at the beginning. So you don't have to take notes. I want you to sit and just let the information diffuse into your brain, okay? Let it land in the way that it needs to land. I'll get the team to send out the link to this YouTube video, and you can then make notes, pause, rewind, whatever it is that you want to do. And I also have a newsletter that has summaries of these things provided on a regular basis, so you will be able to get this content, okay? So I hope that helps. So that first sugar is that simple sugar, and even if it's coconut sugar or maple sugar or coconut nectar, it's basically what it is it's so simple that it quickly breaks down when you eat it. It quickly breaks down in your mouth, gets absorbed into your gut, and your blood level of sugar will go up. So it's absorbed, right? The sugar goes in, the levels go up, and your body senses it. It has a sensor. And that sensor tells the pancreas, which sits right here, to make the hormone insulin, okay? And so the body pumps out insulin, and depending on how much sugar it sees, it makes more insulin. So if it sees a sudden massive spike of sugar, it will release a sudden massive amount of insulin, okay? And we don't want that, because insulin has a Goldilocks zone. You want it not too much, not too little, okay? In the Goldilocks zone, you get a little bit of sugar released, you get a little bit of insulin made. What insulin does, the function of insulin, is it goes to the doors of the cells and it goes knock, knock, knock. Sugars in the blood open up. We want the sugar to go from the blood into the tissues so the tissues can use it for energy. And so the sugar rushes into, from the blood into the tissues. And what you see, if I was to wear a continuous glucose monitor or prick my finger with a glucometer like diabetics do, I've done this just out of self-experimentation. I do this with people in my health promotion programs. You see the blood sugar goes up, insulin is produced. You don't see that, but you see the blood sugar then go down. Okay, that's what's happening behind the scenes. But if you eat too much sugar all at once, what happens is you see a massive spike in the blood sugar behind the scenes, the insulin is being made a ton of insulin. All of that sugar then goes rushing into the cells, okay? And then you have a massive drop in blood sugar because you had to make so much insulin. It's like a big roller coaster. So instead of this nice wave, you're getting this big spikes and big crashes. What is the problem with that? Okay, short-term problems. In the moment, when the insulin goes very high, insulin is just not a sugar hormone, it's a fat storage hormone. It goes to your body's fat cells and it says, we have too much sugar all at once. Please take some of the sugar and store it as fat. Okay, so your fat switch gets turned on in that moment. Then what happens is when you crash down, right, after the big high comes the big low, it's too low for the body. You get what's called kind of like a hypoglycemia. You might have heard of this. Some people feel it. They're like, I'm hangry, I'm jittery, I'm a little bit irritable, right? And some people don't feel it at all. But what happens is that your body then goes into stress mode on the very low. What happens in stress mode? Your body makes the hormone cortisol. And the cortisol hormone is very damaging when it's being made like that after every meal. Cortisol should just really go up in the morning to help you get up out of bed, and then slowly drop through the day so you can fall asleep at night.
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Welcome back to Open Connection. Cortisol is a steroid hormone that is produced by your 2 adrenal glands, which sit on top of each kidney. When you're stressed, increased cortisol is released in your bloodstream. Having the right cortisol imbalance is essential for your health. Let us return to the conversation as Dr. Mills shares what happens if your body is producing too much or too little cortisol.
What happens if cortisol is constantly being activated? You're going to feel irritable, you're going to feel stressed out, your body's going to be stressed out, it's going to be hard to sleep at night, it's going to be hard to fall asleep, it's going to be hard to stay asleep, it's going to be hard to have quality sleep, and over time, high cortisol leads to inflammation. What does inflammation do in the body? It is at the root of every single chronic disease, and I mean that without exception. Cancer, obesity, heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, it's all related to that. So we need to be so attentive to these highs and these lows. We want to walk the middle way when it comes to sugar. So you don't want too much sugar, but you don't want too little, because sugar, glucose, is important for bodily energy. And for women, we need glucose to make hormones in the brain. We have 50% less serotonin hormone, which is the feel-good hormone, in the brain. In the brain, it's called the neurotransmitter. It's a short signal hormone. We have 50% less serotonin than men. We need carbohydrates to make that serotonin. But how do we eat carbohydrates without spiking our insulin? Well, that comes number 2. Oops, sorry, there we go. Number 2 is starch. Starch is the second kind of carbohydrate, and starch is interesting because it comes in linked chains of glucose, so starch is what you find in starchy foods. Can people shout out starchy foods for me that you're aware of? Whole foods that have starch in them. Potatoes, rice, quinoa, beans. What's that, sorry? Peas. Yeah, not as much. It's more of the root vegetables. So the root vegetables like the carrots and the potatoes and the beets and the sweet potatoes. And I'm not saying they're bad. I'm just categorizing them as being high starch compared to fiber. So they're starchy foods. Every whole grain, rice, quinoa, teff, millet, sorghum, anything like that. And every single bean. Pasta, high starch, exactly. And what's cool about starch is that it typically comes packaged in fiber. So in nature packages starch in fiber. So there's a lot of fiber in a potato, for example. Fiber, what's really cool about fiber is that it's a starch that doesn't have any glucose or fructose or galactose, the most simple sugars. It is made up of cellulose, hemicellulose, and pectin. What's really cool about these compounds is our body cannot absorb them. They get broken down in the mouth when we chew, into the gut, and then they go on to coat our small intestine, which comes right after the stomach, and they coat it with a jelly-like substance. The fiber gets turned into this jelly-like substance, and it coats the lining of our gut. And what does that do is it slows down the absorption of the glucose in the starch that's coming with it. So it is better to eat a starchy food, a whole food that's starchy, than it is to eat a simple sugar. And we also have to recognize that if you eat a starchy food on its own, you might still get a too high blood sugar response. So if someone eats a lot of potatoes or a lot of rice or a lot of pasta on its own, they will run into problems with the insulin spike. So how do we eat our starchy carbs in a way that we don't get the insulin spike? And I'm going to teach you a number of tricks that you're going to use to be able to eat your healthy starches. I eat pasta, I eat rice, I eat sourdough bread, I eat all those things. And I can tell you, I'm eating more now than I have ever eaten my whole life, and I have an easier time controlling my weight because of these tips I'm going to teach you. They work. I work with women in health promotion programs and the MSP covered program, and we always manage to get this right for people. So I really want you to pay attention because it really works. So we talked about the short-term impact of insulin. I want to motivate you to learn what I'm about to teach you. Because you might be thinking, yeah, sure, okay, like it's affecting me now. Well, what about in the future? Well, in the future, if you have insulin being released all the time in high amounts, you develop what's called insulin resistance. Has anyone here ever heard of insulin resistance? Okay, has everyone here not heard of insulin resistance?
Open Connection will be right back after these messages. And now, from the CFTK-TV studios, this is Open Connection with your host, Robert Pictou.
Insulin is produced by the pancreas and is released into the bloodstream when blood sugar levels increase, such as after eating. Insulin moves glucose from blood into cells, or it can be used for energy or stored. In this final segment of Open Connection, Dr. Mills explains insulin resistance.
Insulin resistance is, I'm going to give you kind of like a little story. So let's say that insulin is a key. Okay, so you have a key and you have a lock. Insulin is the key, and on every single tissue of your body, there's the lock that the key goes into and works with. Those are called the receptors. They receive the insulin. And the receptors, they work very well if they receive a little bit of insulin every now and then. They don't work really well if they're getting massive amounts of insulin, because it's like the lock and key. If I take a key and I keep jamming into a lock, what happens to the lock? It breaks, right? So then you have all these locks that are not receiving the key, and what happens is your body has to make more insulin, so you start to get an increase in your insulin. Over time, even that's not enough to compensate. Your body can't keep up with the damage. And what happens is over time, your blood sugar starts to go up. And if your doctor was to do a blood test on you, they might say, oh, look at that, you're in pre-diabetes. Or now you're in diabetes, okay? That's what will happen over time, because insulin resistance is kind of like if someone is starting to lose their hearing and you have to shout louder for them to hear. Do you know what I mean? So the body's trying to shout louder by making more insulin, but after a while, you're deaf. Doesn't matter how much insulin you make. It's like very little of it is heard in the body. And that's when you get into pre-diabetes, diabetes, and all the consequences that you have with diabetes. Some people never develop diabetes. Guess what they develop instead? Alzheimer's. Alzheimer's is type 3 diabetes of the brain. So if you get diabetes in the muscle, if you get insulin resistance in the muscle, you get diabetes. If you get it in the brain, you get Alzheimer's. That's a genetic Like people develop it differently because of genetics. And so you need to look at your family history. Am I going to tend to get it in the brain, or am I going to tend to get it in the muscles? Some people don't have it in their family history because their mothers and fathers never ate that way. So then you're the first person to experience insulin resistance of the brain, because modern foods have a lot of hidden sugars, okay? And insulin resistance is also linked to cancer, right? It's not just diabetes, it's also linked to heart attacks, strokes. Number one cause of death in women over the age of 50, heart attacks. So the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's is that you can have other reasons for dementia, like mini strokes in the brain, for example, right? Still the same root cause, but it wouldn't be called Alzheimer's, but still related to inflammation and insulin resistance and blood flow and all those things. That's right, it's connected, for sure. So where are some hidden sugars? This is so key, because I get people coming to me all the time and they're like, I eat healthy. I have my smoothie in the morning, and then I have my protein bar in the afternoon, and then I'll go out and grab this like super healthy green goddess salad dressing and I'll pour it over my food at night, and it's like, check the labels. Did you know there's 56 different words for sugar that the industry is using so that they can say, I once saw it was like, the first ingredient was dextrose, then it was maltose, then it was fructose corn syrup, and then it was like blah, blah, blah. It had 10 of the 56 in one thing. And on the front, it said healthy, natural, organic. Do not read the labels. Read the ingredient lists. If you can take one thing away from this entire talk, go check your pasta sauce if you eat pasta sauce. Turn it around. Look at not the protein, fat, sugar, not that. I want you to see the words of the ingredients, okay? And if it's a word that you don't recognize, look it up, Google it, and see, what is this? It's either a food additive that can harm your gut health, or it's a sugar that's going to harm your hormone health. And gut health and hormone health are interconnected, right? So if you don't know that and you get into my world, you will learn about that. So here we go, cereal for kids. So toxic with sugar, it's so sad. Kids' cereals these days, I wouldn't touch it with a 10-foot pole. Granola, most granolas, okay? Most breads. Did you know that the most table salt that you will find is in commercially baked breads? I'm going to teach you what kind of bread you should have, but I'm not worried about the natural salt that you sprinkle on your food for flavoring. I'm worried about the rolls and the commercial breads that are full of salt and sugar to give them flavor. Because when you bake bread like a good sourdough bread is flavorful. When you don't do it properly, when you don't do the fermentation process and just all you have is the flour, it's tasteless. They add a lot of stuff to that. So I'm going to teach you what kind of bread to eat. Gluten-free goods. Every single gluten-free baked pastry, cookie, bread, whatever has you is full of sugar because they need to add flavor. Oat milk, full of sugar. I know I get this all the time. People are addicted to their oat milk. Why? Because it's a sugar shot. It tastes really good because it's full of sugar. It's better to have real milk.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Open Connection. The greatest distance in the existence of man is not from here to there, but the connection from his mind and heart. If we can conquer that distance, we can soar like an eagle and realize our immensity within. I'm Robert Pictou.